Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
No formalities. It's just going to be, this is called Ramblings of a Madman, hence the self stigmatization. Which brings me on to an interesting fact. Did you know, and I'm sure you did know this, that homosexuality was considered a mental illness until 1970?
Wow.
In the
I
diagnostic
can relate.
statistical of mental health disorders. No, seriously. And no, but I say that more from a standpoint is that wasn't that long ago,
Yeah.
really, when we talk about it. But I wanted to talk to you because I've known you for my whole of my adult life. And I've obviously read your book, which is, look, a shameless plug there for anyone watching, Gay Man Talking. And I read this with mixed emotions, which I've told you about already. Positive, I think, because as long as I've known you, firstly as friend, then housemate, turned journalist, now author, a lot of the conversations you're encouraging people to have in that, I haven't even had those conversations with you. So I had a mixture
Bad
of,
friend.
well,
Bad friend.
partly, yeah, you are absolutely right because I had admiration at the vulnerability and the openness you share that. So, like, huge respect for everything that you shared there, but also a little bit of guilt. Like, I know things like your coming out story and probably stuff that I had almost bypassed as things that didn't occur to me because they're not important to me, because they're just not, might have
Mm.
appeared to you as me not caring about those things. So I've only known you not because of your sexuality, but because you're just Dan, and it just so happens to be your sexual preference is what it is,
Yeah.
which I understand also from a heterosexual point of view is a bit of a privilege thing because I've never really thought about my sexuality.
Mm.
I've never had a huge sense of identity attached to it. I've never obviously been through the things that you have. I've never been ridiculed, bullied, or anything like that. And it made me think about how much, in terms of conversation, I've missed out just from talking to you.
I think it's one of those weird things though, because it's quite nice to hear you say you just know me as Dan, because that's all I wanted all along, like for my whole life actually. And so often I wasn't referred to as just Dan, unfortunately.
Mm.
I was referred to as gay Dan or
Mm.
the gay best friend or um, loads of different titles that I wasn't comfortable with. And I think that's the thing that I kind of clinged on to, this sort of feeling that actually everyone was branding me, but no one was really just seeing me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I found really uncomfortable growing up as a gay guy. And I think that's the thing. And yeah, you reference like obviously having these conversations, but it's probably my fault because I hadn't had these conversations deliberately. And growing up, I didn't feel, and a lot of people do feel comfortable now, especially in this day and age, but I didn't feel comfortable with being gay. Um, I'm not sure if you can see that
I
now.
think you're comfortable now. I
I'm
think
a
you're
lot more
comfortable now.
comfortable, but I still have like I still actually on the train today I zipped up my coat
Mm.
and because obviously I'm wearing something that is a little bit out there and can obviously divide opinion. But I think growing up I definitely had that sense of I'm not sure who I am. Even though I knew when I obviously realised that I was a gay guy, I still didn't really know who I was. And so coming out was something that was uncomfortable but necessary. And then I thought, right, I just want to get on with it. I want to sweep everything under the carpet, move forward. I don't want to be known as gay Dan. And that's what I was constantly branded as, gay best friend. And the girls always like innocently would joke or say things like that, not in a horrible way, just in
Mm.
an affectionate way. But it killed me, like, and it really hurt. Um, so all my life, I just kind of ran from it, and then all of a sudden, I had this wonderful opportunity to do the book because I wrote an article about being the gay best friend and how it has lots of toxic connotations, and I had to sit down and have all these conversations. And it was the best thing that ever happened for me and for everyone around because I finally breathed after like carrying this burden for so long.
Mm. And I suppose, like, so what we speak to there, a sense of guilt that came from that is I've probably been a bystander to a lot of that because being of the same social group and things like that is I'm Dan, you're Dan, gay Dan, Dan. Like, again, like, it wouldn't have even registered in my head as a big deal. So to
Yeah.
read that actually was quite hurtful to you did make me feel like a bit of a terrible friend because I hadn't really thought about it. Because for me at the time, it was just a harmless differentiator, which I kind of just as a bystander just saw you get on with,
Mm.
which my assumption falsely was just you were okay with it, and obviously not.
I think that it's such a weird thing because 100% like I understand who my friends are and who would be saying things maliciously. I mean, I went through, obviously it's in the book, bullying and different things, and I understand who calls me a name versus who calls me something affectionately. I get that totally. So never, when any of the group were saying, "Oh, gay Dan," because we're both Dan, so obviously we joke with each other anyway, and there's a
It's
lot
harmless,
of
but
banter.
almost
It's
like
harmless.
why is that the one thing to differentiate us?
But it's crazy as
Not
well,
blonde,
though.
not blonde Dan, not dark haired Dan.
Yeah,
It's
good looking Dan.
Well, obviously both of us. Did you like that stealth escape?
Yeah, I like the silence. But yeah, I think that it was something that was a problem that I had, like, and I didn't vocalize, which was the first mistake. And second of all, I just was seen by it, and all I kept on feeling, it stems back actually to younger, before you guys, actually, the partners, when the girls who obviously I love, I've claimed a lot of times in interviews and in the book that they rescued me, and I really do believe that. Like, if I didn't have them, I've spoken very openly, I don't know where I'd be or if I'd be here. I'm not actually 100% sure, because I went through a very tough time. But they were fiercely protective of me, but also wanted to embrace the fact that I was gay. So I think a lot of the time they would, like, say, "This is my gay best friend. Have you got a problem with it?" And all of that sort of stuff, because they wanted to show me that they were okay with it, which is actually, when you think about it, really lovely. But all it kept on doing inside of me is just branding me gay. And
highlighting there's a difference as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
And I think, like, for a long time I lost my identity, and my identity was the token gay. And literally it was like, and actually I really struggled, and I lost a lot of, like, actually my personality and stuff, because I put on an act for so long. And it wasn't until actually, like, sitting down and actually having these conversations, and not just sharing what my feelings were, but also hearing, like, I speak to obviously my parents, different people in the book, and hearing actually their thoughts and how they dealt with different things and how they wanted to help or how they wanted to be. And the thing is, unless you're having these conversations or reading books or writing about it, like, no one's going to know, no one's going to understand, no one's going to know how you feel. And it's the same in all walks of life. You have to have different conversations, awkward, cringeworthy, and tell people how you're feeling, because otherwise you're going to go through life a closed version of yourself, which is unfortunately what I did, and what so many people in the LGBTQ plus community do. They do actually go through life closeted or closed, or only revealing some of themselves. And that is what I'm trying to encourage people to do, to sort of join the conversation and have these, like, awkward chats and stuff, because it's actually really cathartic. I know we spoke before about it, but it's such a process and such a journey, and I feel so much lighter for it.
I do think there's something incredibly powerful, and obviously I can't compare it to the same scale that you have, but the way you formalise a thought and then actually articulating that in your words and seeing those words reflected back at you, it kind of solidifies how important those experiences were at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that part of that I'll reference quite often, that strength in speaking narrative, is that it's hugely courageous, I think, to have the vulnerability to go to people and speak to them, but also that you kind of reference there is you can't just take for granted that we know what people are thinking. So unless we're actively bringing up and instigating those conversations, which is why I wanted to do this, really, because I think of times gone by. It's nothing that consciously, I can honestly say, and I did think about it reflectively, like, was that a conversation I was avoiding? I don't think I was. It wasn't something I felt that was that important to you, because if I'd known it was important, which I now understand from reading your book was hugely important to you,
it was a conversation.
I would have had that conversation.
But I wouldn't. That's the problem. I was avoiding those conversations. Like, I feel almost bad in a way, because a lot of people share the sort of opinion and thought that you have. And I feel almost bad because loads of people have said to me, "I'm sorry," or "I didn't realise you felt like that," all of this stuff. But it's my fault, really, because I would never have been prepared to have these conversations back then, because it just highlighted my gay. And I just do not want to do that sort of thing. I do not want to do that. But I really decided, like, and actually someone asked me this in my publisher, and they said there's a lot. This is like going through obviously the final sort of manuscript. There's a lot of you in this, and I was just like, and they were just, you need to be prepared that this is telling the world sort of all of these sort of.
It's
bits
incredibly
and stuff.
vulnerable. There's
Yeah.
there's loads, yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, I think it's the only way. Like I genuinely believe, and I was so scared for it to come out, and people to read it, and I was so anxious, and you go through this really weird process. I think obviously you write as well, and when someone reads your stuff, you hope that they get what you mean, or you hope that they take something away from it or can relate to something, but you also really just hope that they like it and hope that it resonates with people. And I think that because there was so much of me in it, and it was very truthful in the sense of you're getting the me that isn't the fantastic me when you're on a date with me.
The best version.
Yeah. You're getting like every version of me, which is scary because there's obviously a lot in that book that I don't really want people to know, but it was essential to obviously go through to, because I made a real commitment to the book in the sense of I knew that I needed to tell everything. Otherwise, if you tell half, it's not going to have the same effect. And so it was really important, and it was really hard. And I mean, the conversations in it were hard to have, and some of them has sparked sort of further conversations, which is really good. But it's definitely a process, and definitely like something that I've chucked my whole self into it. So now I can only step out of the shadow and be myself. So it's actually forced me to sort of come to terms with the fact that I am gay. And I actually think, like, in a weird sense, perhaps I've been walking around for years not accepting that.
That's really interesting, because I think radical acceptance is something that everyone has to deal with at some point,
Yeah.
as well as their identity. Identity is a huge part of us on a basic human primitive level, I think. But that self-acceptance, and especially what you refer to then, and having those difficult conversations, because the reality of having those difficult conversations is they might not go the way you want them to.
100%.
Have you had any experience of that from
Do you
your
know
writing your
what?
book?
I mean, conversations about love. I obviously speak with an ex, and the ex isn't named in there, which is the only person in the book that isn't named. Basically, every conversation that I had to get them to sign a waiver, because otherwise they could sue me.
Sure.
So,
Kind of a big deal, yeah.
and on conversations with about love, I spoke to an ex, and they said, yep, they're happy to be named, they're happy to sort of go through it, and everyone agreed not to read before it was published, which is in the contract. So it's quite obviously you know what it's like this interview sort of thing, you know sort of what you're saying, but you can't always remember, and no one is prepared for how it's
Edit that
actually
bit out.
yeah, exactly. Cut. But no one's prepared to see, like, after an interview in written words. It's very my background's as a journalist, and I know I've had loads of complaints about interviews that I've done in the past because people get worried about how they come across on print versus in an interview. It's very different. And the ex that's referenced in that chapter just decided before it was launched, no, I want to actually be anonymous, which everyone had the opportunity to be. And actually, since, I'm not sure if they've read it. I think they probably have, but they have stopped talking to me.
Okay.
So it has sort of like, I don't know if it's the book or it's that's something that they don't want to sort of approach, but in having that conversation, it has obviously either closed a door or, which we were friends anyway, so that's fine. But I think the conversations themselves have been really awkward. And I actually was on a panel recently, and someone asked me, do you encourage people to have these conversations themselves? And I said, yes, but with care. Like, I'm trying to encourage people to talk, and that's what the book is trying to do. But there's different scenarios that it isn't easy to talk. In the parent chapter, I reference a lovely guy called Mufseen, and he went through something which is unimaginable with his family. They didn't accept him. And so it's not always a safe place to sort of tell your truth and talk. But what I would encourage people to do is talk where you can. Because I mean, in the LGBTQ plus community, we often have this saying, which is family is also your chosen family, because a lot of family doesn't accept who you are. So I encourage everyone to just be open and talk about themselves to whoever they can. But yeah, you definitely get, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag of who you speak to. I mean, our friends, having read it, have all come back with lots of views and opinions.
I haven't, admittedly, I haven't heard any. I've kind of, I like to take an entirely objective view. I've read it myself, and that's why I kind of wanted to formalise my own thoughts and have a chat with you.
Well, thank you for reading it.
Well, I could not. I couldn't go ahead being one of those gorillas you reference. Those, yeah, homophobic gorillas. No, I don't think I am one of those. But perhaps we can get back to that. But what you say there, especially when you talk about written text, I forget the guy's first name. I'm sure someone correct me if they listen to this. There was a researcher from the 70s by something Hall, and his theory around encoding and decoding,
Okay.
and especially when it comes to written word, is that we have this encoding process. So it's our thought and intention behind words, and then everyone individually has their decoding process.
Yeah.
So communication always occurs on the terms of the listener. Your intent isn't always what's taken on by other people, and that's based on their biases, their mood that day, how they've woken up, all of those different things. So I think naturally with text, and we see it on social media all the time, like social media is a terrible place to debate because everyone has their own agenda. Everyone
100%.
extrapolates whatever they want to on that. So there is a huge amount of trust and risk that go with that, which I think is commendable. But you were saying about picking your family and things like that. It is definitely context specific, but there's always, as you said, that self-acceptance thing that if it is your truth and you feel comfortable and safe, because safety is a factor
100%.
as well, sharing that message
Yeah.
with your loved ones, it is the consequence of that might be that it will radically affect those relationships forever.
100%. And I think that's something that is so key. It's the same, I would assume, for any sort of sexuality or human, but any conversation that is a huge part of your life, be it sexuality, mental health, any life-changing decisions, if you have those conversations with anyone, it is going to change because you're being vulnerable, you're being real, which is something my dad said actually for years he had felt that I hadn't been. And it is going to change dynamics. It's going to change, and you have to be prepared for negative and positive. And unfortunately, that just comes with any conversation you have that's kind of hard. And that's something that has, and like I say, when people read it, and especially the written word, even some of the non-conversations and my opinion and stuff, people have really taken it like, hey, you've said this, I don't agree. And it really does like divide opinion. So you kind of have to have a bit of a thick skin about it as well and think, okay, well, this is just one view. Like, this is not just obviously everyone's story. But yeah, people do definitely interpret things differently, and it's definitely weird having conversations with people.
Yeah, I guess that must be really challenging. If you've got that objective account of something that's happened, and again, it's based on that individual, how they read that, especially if it's one of those individuals you spoke about having to sign a document.
Oh my God, yeah.
Are they already feeling a bit defensive before they've even read it? Because if you feel defensive already, and you see something mildly that feels like an attack.
Yeah, my mum.
Really?
She was... my mum is obviously a huge supporter, but she obviously had the interview, and she was really emotional actually during the interview. She was really teared up a few times actually, because there's a lot obviously when you're discussing, and I was telling my mum how I felt at the time, because my mum went through her own sort of journey, but a lot of the time it came across that she sort of wasn't comfortable with me being gay, which is absolutely fine as well. It's fine to not be comfortable, but talk about it, like have those conversations. And I think she got really upset actually because we'd never sort of discussed that, and perhaps that was part my fault. And then when she read it back and read the book, she said it's really hard sometimes because everyone worries about how they come across. Like that's just a natural thing. It's not a vanity thing. It's a real like thing. Like you're putting something out there. And I think my mum was concerned as well because she obviously doesn't want people to perceive her as something that she's not. She's a very accepting person. But obviously she went through a period of her life where she didn't realise perhaps how she was coming across. And that's why also these conversations are so important. And I really have been sort of like saying out loud a long time that this isn't a book just for the community. This is a book for the allies as well, because everyone needs to sort of understand, like you were saying about, oh, you never knew about branding and stuff. Like that I was okay with being called gay Dan or whatever. And I think it's really important for like allies and other people in the outside of the community to read this sort of literature and realise like how people are feeling, because we've got to understand each other, and that's life as well. We've just got to keep on sharing messages and support.
Well, I think you speak to there a little bit about self-awareness. I think no matter how self-aware we believe we are, we've all got blind spots.
Oh,
So
100%.
it does take
Yeah.
for someone to have those, again, those uncomfortable conversations sometimes, because I think sometimes, and I can certainly reflect back on loads of them, is you think and you're behaving in a certain way, and someone's like, hang on, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
And I have to step back and go, oh, actually, I need to check myself there.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I have the tendency to go deep. Do you know what I mean? Like, sorry.
That's you, that's not me, that's you. I accept no responsibility for that.
But like, and I love a deep and meaningful conversation sometimes, and I think that sometimes you can fall into a trap of just surface level chat, and especially when you're at a party or something like that, no one wants the heavy conversations and stuff. And I think that so often we forget that we've got to, no, I've got to tell you about this, like, because I haven't. And it's so true, not just about sexuality, but about mental health, about like how we're feeling. There's obviously the common thing where people respond, I'm fine, which doesn't really mean I'm fine. And I think it's so, we forget so often to actually have a good chat rather than a surface level chit chat, which is fine for parties or speed dating.
Well, it's fine for I think that's fine for some people in general. Certainly something I've been guilty of, because I know, when just speaking about my own mental health, is sometimes I have been that one to put on a mask, and you do have those surface level chats when actually you're kind of crying out for some real human connection, someone to be vulnerable with. And I think we spoke a little bit about having the communication skills to have those conversations, but I also think something that's not really acknowledged or spoken about is, are people equipped with the listening skills?
Yeah,
because
so true.
when you are in that position, I think sometimes, and you do desperately want to share something, the last thing you want to do is be consoling someone else for dealing with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because some people just don't have that skill, and I don't necessarily mean that as a negative on people. It's just, as any other skill, it's something that we have to develop. And I think sometimes we listen as a means of waiting for opportunity to speak, rather than listening to understand people.
Do you know what? That's so true. I think that's fascinating as well, and I think that's actually why. Obviously, American culture have a lot in like looking for a psychiatrist, a shrink, or whatever. And they're ridiculed a little bit about how often they do this sort of thing. But therapy is actually such a huge, common growing thing here as well, because I think having that outlet for someone to listen, and who's trained to listen to you and to release and let go, is such a good thing. And I think that it's something that shouldn't be sort of like frowned upon or ridiculed. It's really good to talk, and it's really hard to listen. I think you're really correct in what you're saying, and you've got to find the right person. And I think that's so important. Again, like in writing the book, I think it's something that there's so many conversations and feelings that I had that I don't think I could have verbalized at the time, and writing them down and actually expressing them. Hopefully, I've had a lot of brilliant and incredible comments from people who have just said, it's like you sort of crept into my mind and wrote how I was feeling, thank you, and stuff, which is so lovely. And I'm not looking for validation from people, but it's so nice that other people have those sort of feelings, and we all need to express them. And I think it's so important to like be a good listener just as much as a good sort of talker. And so, yeah, you've got to have those conversations, definitely.
What you say there is validation. I think that's just a basic human need, is to be seen,
100%.
heard, understood. Which, again, I think talk therapy is so good, and speaking to the right people, because I think everyone can possibly think of an example. You have a conversation with someone and they can't focus on you, their eyes are flitting around the room, or they just glaze over waiting for their opportunity to speak. But actually, again, someone that's trained to listen, acknowledging what you're going through, validating your experience, and understanding from that standpoint, not necessarily to confirm or deny that you're in the right or wrong, but just to take that on board, just be a sounding board.
Yeah, and like I feel like as well, you're really right in the sense of like actually people sort of understanding. And I read this really interesting thing that sometimes the best thing you can do is be silent. And I really love silence now. I used to absolutely hate it, especially on dates. But
Depends on the circumstances, right?
yeah, well, when do you want silence?
Are you having a good time?
Yeah, exactly. No one needs that eye contact. um, but it said like the power of silence as a response is really interesting, and a lot of people feel the silence from awkwardness or which I definitely do. Or uncomfortable feelings of like, oh, I've got to say something sort of thing. But sometimes actually just like the silence of a response and a nod or something like that actually just verifies, yeah, no, I'm here still. Do you know what I mean? And like what you're saying is important. I want to listen. And I think like that's the other thing. I think we cut people off so often, and we're time poor. We're like literally a nation that's time poor, or looking at our social devices or whatever. And I'm just as guilty. So I think it's really about like having conversations, listening to people, and being responsive in the correct and right way. And sometimes that response is nothing. It's a hug.
Yeah, totally. And that's something I've been incredibly conscious of because I think sometimes as well, people, they just want to vent. They don't want advice. So
Yeah.
I always try to clarify that now as in, do you want to vent or do you want my opinion on that? Because the last thing you want sometimes when you're venting to someone, you just want to shout, holler, call someone names, them to go, have you tried this? Like, no, I'm not asking for advice now. I just want you to listen.
Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes you just like need to have your rant and then be done. Or like whatever your outlet is.
Yeah.
Sex.
Well, or that.
That's a really good outlet.
I read that chapter as well. Oh, it's fine. It's just things that, again...
It wasn't too graphic, was it?
It wasn't too graphic, but I read that more from I don't even think I had an agenda, but I guess like a curiosity standpoint, because things like douching, for example, nothing I'd ever considered, nothing that I've ever had to think about, but something that you do. So just I guess like the
How dare you say that? Something you do.
well, according to your book,
I
you
didn't
do.
today.
Well, according to your book, you do. But
No, I
like
do.
as in...
And rightly so. You do not want to not douche. I'm telling you, I've been in that scenario and it's not pleasant.
Save that one. I can only imagine. That's a very vivid... Yeah.
Dan, I'm really glad that you went on.
I'm glad I brought this up. No, but I was thinking it more from like a cognitive load point of view of all the other things you've got to think about, your identity, whether or not you can wear a certain jumper in public, what sort of response you're going to get from people from just being yourself to dating, and the other things that you possibly have to think about as well. It's just, your head must be full all the time.
It's my second book title, Dating and Douching.
I thought you was going to go with your head has to be full all the time.
Yeah,
that's a different one. That's the third one.
Next one. No, it is. I mean, jokes aside, sex is a huge part of, obviously, I mean, the clues in the title, sexuality, the word. Obviously, our community is so sexualized, and for right and wrong reasons. And I think that's one of the key things that you sort of, well, I grappled with a little bit growing up, because obviously it's our defining sort of feature at first, in the sense of like between heterosexual or myself as a gay man, we're having sex differently. So that's sort of like the thing that you first think of. And it's interesting, it's uncomfortable, and I reference this, and I think it's so important. Our education in school just does not set us up for the different sexualized experiences that we're going to have. And I'm not saying that they should teach us in school how to douche. Be handy. Be absolutely handy. Messy. Should probably be done in the science lab.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not like sticking a condom on a banana, is it?
It's not.
It's a whole different visual that goes along with it.
A whole different visual. But yeah, so I think that it's just about, and I do reference this a lot actually, and education first. I think that we do need to be teaching children that sex can be obviously different for different people. It's not always good. There's different ways of having it. Obviously, sexual health is so important, and we need to obviously continue that narrative. But I think for me, growing up, I felt out of place and odd because I kind of had to learn on my own, or I do reference this as well through porn.
I think that's how a lot of youngsters learn most things. And
yeah,
I think, sorry to interject there, I was just going to say, like in terms of like body image is always a fascinating subject for me. If you look at what people can get done now and what they're exposed to what women have done to their vaginas, to what men have done to their penises, and are placed in porn, if that's how you're picking up things, as well as all the other things that might be within that and how to get on and make it happen, you're going to grow up with a pretty skewed look on
100%.
things.
I mean, yeah, 100%. And I mean, gay porn, for example, really is not reflective of what gay sex is like. And I mean, sex is fantastic, obviously, for like anyone who enjoys it and consents, obviously. But what you see in porn, and I'm sure it's the same for heterosexuals, is not what you see in the reality. It's like, can be messy, can be awkward, can be uncomfortable, can be a variety of different things. And that's why it's so fascinating, actually, because I think like, and a lot of people, maybe you've got an opinion on this, didn't think I was, but I might project like funny comments or stuff like that, but I'm actually a little bit like of a prude in the sense of like, talking about actual my sex life is really, I find quite uncomfortable. But I sat down obviously in that chapter with a sex worker who does porn, and he was so fascinating. It was so incredible how free he spoke about sex and the sex work industry. And he did this incredible thing called porn for prep, which is really incredible. And PrEP is obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, is a drug that you can take that protects you from HIV.
I've
And
never
it's
heard of
really, it's incredible that is now available. And especially for the gay community who had a lot of stigmas attached to obviously HIV and AIDS, it's so fantastic that this drug is available. And he did a porn PrEP for porn, or porn for PrEP. Apologies if I got that wrong. And it's all about obviously like sexual health and obviously being smart and stuff. So there's really some brilliant things that come out of porn, and it gets a really bad name. And I think sex in itself, like in my household, I reference sex was a bit of a swear word. I think
It's still a taboo, massively. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think most people that tuned into this, for example, if they've reached this point, would have expected us to be talking about sex. I certainly hadn't planned that, but I said to you, like with podcasts and so on,
No one should plan sex.
but I think, but like,
Unless you need to douche, plan it.
plan, yeah. But within that, I like the organic flow of conversation. But when you talk about, and I think it's when it's broken down from when you're younger, is love is sexualized to a certain degree anyway.
Yeah, of
but
course.
actually, there's almost this scale in between that no one ever speaks about, like intimacy. Intimacy isn't just physical connection.
Yeah.
It's holding hands. It's sharing a meme. It's sharing a podcast, laughing at the same things. There's all these different variations, incarnations of what love looks like. So it is a bit skewed from that perspective growing up anyway. But then you've got this added layer of sexuality and
Yeah.
what you are and you aren't taught and where you have to go to get that kind of information. Plus, from what I gather as well from reading your book, is there's an element of, I don't want to say risk. I don't think risk is a fair descriptor, but an element of worry and concern around what you've already referenced, like HIV, for example, and it being
Massively.
associated with.
Yeah, massively. I was actually asked the other day, do I think the stigma sort of is still there in this day and age? And I do think people still worry about it. I definitely do. Even with things like PrEP and like we should be educated. Obviously, there's people that are undetectable, living with HIV, completely healthy, and can't transmit it, which is incredible. But it's still a worry, it's still a concern, it's still something that obviously people live with. And the historic history around obviously the LGBTQ plus community comes with those stigmas and comes with those like tombstones falling if you've got it sort of adverts and stuff. And it was, I mean, our parents obviously grew up in the 80s having kids, and they grew up in that crisis, in that moment where my mum couldn't have a blood transfusion in hospital because of the crisis. They weren't sure about the blood and stuff, and lots of people went through that. And so for my mum, one of the first things she said when I came out was, "Oh my gosh, but I don't want you to get AIDS." And it's
Like
one
it was
of
a
those
given.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that our parents worried that we'd grow up and have it, and it's a real fear as well. It is a real fear, and I've got lots of fantastic friends who are undetectable, and they're living their life, a very healthy life. And there are still stigmas around that, and there shouldn't be, absolutely shouldn't be, because you can live your life with it, but obviously people do still fear it, and there is an argument to fear it as well. And I think that there's something that, until it's eradicated completely from our lives, it will still be a concern. But you can't, well, I can't think about sex and not think about some of those things that come with it. But interestingly, the heterosexual community actually is now higher in the heterosexual community.
Really?
Yeah, because of PrEP. Because in the LGBTQ plus community, you're allowed to now go on PrEP. So it sort of eliminates your chance of getting it as well.
So what sorry, can you just, is that, what is that, like a
It's
medication?
Yes, it's a pill you take every day, and effectively it blocks you getting it. Basically.
Oh, okay.
Sort of like, I guess, a female pill sort of thing.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
sort
I
of
wondered
like
whether
that.
it was like a condom or a tablet, or I didn't.
No. Yeah, PrEP. So it's a pill. It's really to laugh.
Why are you laughing? What? Because I'm showing my ignorance.
No, it's good. Why don't you watch PrEP for porn? No, I don't think that's your demographic. It's definitely
It
not.
might not be my bag, so to speak.
But yeah, so it's really good. But sex, especially, and why I wanted to obviously have conversations about sex is because I did view it as a bit of a swear word growing up. I worried, obviously, as well about my own sexual experience, because I was different to the majority of people in our group, and I was having sex differently. So of course I can't speak to you about like what I'm doing, or how do you do like questions like that I just couldn't find. So you have to either find an outlet online or find your community, and it's hard.
Well,
because
without showing our age too much, this was like before social media. This was dial up. Was it night?
dial up, what's that? I'm 25.
What's the reference you say to you tell me that homosexual years are different to heterosexual years?
Yeah, yes, Dan, because what I'm saying is you're 100, okay,
Oh, okay.
past a certain age.
Oh, I thought you were saying I'm 100. Would you rather I don't say my age, as you were the same age?
Absolutely.
So there's cloak and daggers around your age. Is that what you're saying?
There's no cloak and daggers around my age. Everyone knows I'm mid-30s. Thank you very much. That's
Also
just
terrible to watch a horror movie with. If anyone else wants
I am
an
very
assessment
jumpy.
of Dan.
Yeah, I remember those times.
Yeah.
See that, and that was nice actually, because we obviously lived together at uni, and like those nights were really fun. Like just having, and actually that's really interesting as well, because it was really important for me to have part of a gay community sort of thing, a queer community, but also have still be able to be with my...
Call us normos then, or something like that, or
the heteros.
The heteros.
but it was really actually
muggles.
important. The muggles, yeah. It was really important to have like the girls and the guys as well, because like I really think it's important for me, and again my experience is very different from a lot of different people, but it's really important that you can have friends, like, and everyone can have friends from any community. Like a heterosexual man could be really best friends with a gay man, and vice versa, or any walk of life. You can be friends with different people, and it's really important for me to retain those friendships, because that in a sense was grounding me as well. And I think like I was trying to find my sort of path and my way and who I was, but it's really important not to lose different parts of me. And I think actually what I've come to learn is I'm made up of all of those parts. And like, so having nights with you on the sofa and screaming, even though which I did a lot, to horror movies, just to let you know.
I don't think anyone else's mind. No one else's mind was going anywhere else.
To the horror
and cramming into our housemates room to watch Heroes.
Yes,
that he'd downloaded. That was a
God.
brilliant series, Heroes.
That was a brilliant series.
But,
not a brilliant housemate though. He snored a lot.
He snored a lot, got drunk a lot, fell asleep in the bath a lot, left chips burning in the oven to early hours
He
a
was a bit of
lot.
a hazard housemate, wasn't he?
Yeah, but genuinely at those times, like these little things, it just wasn't a thing.
And that's good. Like it was nice to be able to sit there and watch a movie with you and it not be a thing. Like this is the other thing. Like we don't have to talk about sexuality all the time. And if you've got any
yeah, if I'm sorry to, it just feels like an irrelevant added detail, but it's not. It seems irrelevant to me, but to you, it's not. It's something that almost defined you for such a long time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would say it did, and that's also not a bad thing. Like, being part of the queer community is a fantastic thing and very accepting thing, and it's a really good thing when you embrace it as well. But it doesn't have to be your defining moment either, and I think that's what I was sort of worried about as I grew up. I was really worried that no, I will not just be gay Dan. I refuse. I want to be Dan, and I want to be my own thing. And I think for so long I worried that that would be all I would be known for, that I pushed so hard against it and realised actually that I didn't need to. And it's incredible that I have actually got a book out that actually says gay man talking, and I've embraced the sort of thing because I realised that you can put yourself out there and be gay, but also just be you. And that's a lovely thing.
Do you think there was an element of self stigmatization
100%.
when you were going through that as
Yeah.
well? It's because I can think about it from different aspects, obviously not relating to sexuality, but almost developing. Sorry, this is just my turn of phrase. So if it's inaccurate, let me know. But almost developing almost a little bit of a chip on your shoulder about it because you stigmatise yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas I like to think, hopefully, like within our friendship group, is again, it just wasn't a thing like really thought about all of the time.
It was.
It's like something you know, but you're not like that is that person.
And the thing is, you're completely correct, because it was a chip on my shoulder. It was a worry, and it was something that was eating away at me. And sometimes I'd recognise that that's what was happening, and other times I'd be oblivious to it. But it was something that I personally did carry, and it was, and often I think it is, your own problem. And it's like carrying any sort of, not secret because people know about it, but I often reference that coming out is like sweeping it under the carpet. You move forward, you don't want to talk about it anymore, and that's what I did. And I realised actually that it was my own fault, because I should have been having these conversations as drip feeds, like when they come up. Like, you don't have to talk about sexuality all the time, but when different scenarios come up and you feel comfortable to do so, people are different. So if you're talking about, if you're with 3 guys who are heterosexual and they're talking about sex, you should feel okay to be like, okay, you don't have to go into graphic details because most people don't want that anyway, but you can talk about like, oh yeah, I had sex last week as well. It's fine.
It's the same as you probably wouldn't in any, like regardless of sexuality, you wouldn't go into graphic details anyway.
Exactly. And I just think for so long I held my breath and stopped talking, and I'm angry at myself for doing that. And it wasn't until I realised that actually having an opinion in an article I wrote for Cosmopolitan about being the gay best friend triggered so many different things that people were just like, well, I never knew that. And I was just like, well, we've got to start talking. And that's what I hope the book encourages people to do, because no one should lose their voice when they come out. It's actually about finding it.
And that's part of the reason I wanted this conversation. So all of that said about sexuality, if you had to introduce yourself to someone, not what you do, not your sexuality, how would you best describe yourself? Or like people to know of you?
Oh my goodness, man, that's hard.
I didn't warn you about that one, did I?
I guess I would just... So if I'm meeting someone for the first time, I go through this thing, and I think a lot of people do, where they apologise for themselves or don't talk too much about themselves. I do. And so now I'm really trying hard to embrace conversations and stuff, because people say, live in this moment, because it might not be like, I've had a book out, you might never have another one, you might never get this moment again. So I'm trying to embrace it. So I guess what I would say, if I would introduce myself just as Dan, I'm a broadcast editor, got a book out. If people want to know, like, I'm not going to ram it down their throat. Follow me on Instagram.
I'm kind of a big deal, did you know?
No, I would just be me. I would just like say hi. And also I really want to get to know people as well. Like, so it's a two-way street, and I date a lot. So I went on a date last night.
What, over 100 I read in your book?
That was in 1 year.
1 year, yeah.
But I went on a date last night, and you do have those conversations where you just have to introduce yourself and be you. And I think that's one thing that I reference in the book a lot. I start the book by saying, "Am I proud?" and I end the book asking the same question. And for so long, I wasn't proud of who I am, and I was scared of my voice being too high. I was scared that my walk was a bit mincy, or had an air of being gay, or whatever, or I wore something a little bit too homo. Um, but I think for so long I worried about so many different things that I lost who I was. And now I guess I'm kind of just like happy to just be me, and I haven't changed, but I've grown.
Yeah, that's slightly a big ask to put you on the spot as well, because I think
It
there
really
is.
was. Did I even answer
I
that?
know I'm a horrible friend. We've already said this, but there's a natural part of it that is a bit guarded when we go
Yeah.
into introducing any new person. Because I, for one, I hate talking about myself, and I think self-deprecation is just a bit of a British thing. Like, none of us want to appear like we're bragging about anything. But also with vulnerability, you need an element of vulnerability reflected back at you. It's very difficult to
100%.
be entirely open and honest with someone if you feel like they're withholding a little bit. Which, from just speaking about my own experience with therapy, is although the act of speaking and sharing those things is incredibly cathartic, that is the only thing. And from a self-preservation point of view, that as a professional job is you can't give your entire being over to the people you're working with, but there's almost still a little bit of yourself you hold back because
Oh,
you
yeah.
know they can't entirely be honest with you.
I think that's life as well. Like,
That's why I love journaling. I was just going to add to that as well. That's why I like the act of writing.
yeah, but that's actually kind of what my book is as well. It's like a lot of my voice throughout the book and my feelings, but it's so true. I think that I'm encouraging people to be open and honest, and have these conversations, and I'm so much better for it. But I'm still not there, and I reference at the end of the book, "Am I proud?" It's still a question because I've still got a long way to go, because we do naturally hide things about ourselves. We do naturally like walk on eggshells sometimes, and there are still scenarios, especially with sexuality, where you can't be yourself. You can't wear a jumper that says "Stay homo." You can't be out there because it's dangerous and it's not safe sometimes. And as much as I will always campaign, I will stand at Pride, I will put a flag up, I will be happy to support my community, there are still areas of your life you've got to be sensible and protect as well. And it's about protecting yourself, and that goes with every walk of life and every sexuality. We are guarded, and we're layers, and we're just breaking through those layers. And you just want to hope that you get the good friends or the good partner or the good family that peel back those layers and find you.
But again, you say there about safety, something that perhaps not everyone thinks about. So another layer of something that goes on in your brain is that, are you putting yourself in an environment that isn't safe for someone like you, which is just,
Yeah.
again, something a lot of us don't have to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just stems back to lots of different things. I mean, it's not just the LGBTQ plus community. It's like obviously different religions, different races. We have got to understand each other and embrace each other and listen and respect each other and make people feel comfortable, because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you feel comfortable, you can talk.
I'd like to add kind, considerate, thoughtful, and deep to the things that I would use to describe you, just in case you weren't going to use those. Maybe don't go in with deep on the first date. I mean, you could. I don't know. It depends on what the first date is.
As long as you douche.
I think that is a perfect note to finish there, actually. Dan, I appreciate you. Genuinely. I love you.
Love you
Thank
too.
you so much for sharing all that. I do love your book as well, and thank you for having this conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
If anyone else does enjoy this, it's that one, isn't it? Please do subscribe, like, share with a friend maybe if it's mildly more interesting than white noise. Dan would appreciate it. I would appreciate it. And the only way we keep these conversations going is if they reach as many people as possible. So thank you for listening.